I'm Gautam Mukunda. Tonight on Greater Boston, Milton votes to reject zoning laws that would allow for multifamily housing units near their transit stations, defying state law and prompting a larger showdown with the state. We'll talk about what this means for Milton and for efforts to bring down the cost of housing in Massachusetts. And finally, it's been a bumpy month for the MBTA, and we've been hearing all about your frustrations. GBH News transportation reporter Bob C. will be here with some answers. When Milton residents voted to defy state law and reject new multifamily housing requirements, they put their town at risk of legal action and cuts to their state funding. They could also be threatening the goal at the heart of the state law they're flouting, the MBTA Communities Act, which aims to build more housing in Massachusetts. It's a goal my next guest believes is essential to reining in the state's affordability crisis. Jesse Kansan-Benanov, Executive Director of Abundant Housing Massachusetts, joins me now. Jesse, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me, Gautam.
Jesse, give us some hard numbers. Just how bad is the affordability crisis in Massachusetts?
Yeah, we have an extreme affordability crisis here. Our housing costs in Greater Boston, are on par with sort of San Francisco, Manhattan. We're among the most expensive in the country. We have about a shortage of about 200 or more 100,000 homes short of the demand we need for current and future residents in Massachusetts. And that's really what's driving our crisis, is that people are competing, working class families with higher income earners, for the same very limited supply of housing. So it's an extreme housing crisis caused by the utter lack and failure of building homes for the last 30 years in Massachusetts.
So, this is in the state of Massachusetts, but most of that, I'm guessing, in the Boston area. We are 200,000 homes behind. That's the takeaway.
Yes, exactly. It's at least 200,000 homes short of where we need to be in the next 10 or 15 years.
And so, if the only way, presumably, to get those homes is to build them, what's stopping us?
Well, one of the major things that's stopping us is zoning. Zoning is the tool that communities use to say what can be built where. And for generations now in Massachusetts, the state has allowed communities to use zoning not to allow the production of more homes that residents need, but actually to limit the type of homes and the number of homes that can be built in a community. When you say only large luxury single family homes can be built in a community, A, you don't get enough homes across the region, and B, you actually limit who has access to living in those communities. And so we need to change how communities use zoning and look to the future to make sure that the zoning that's on the books in a variety of communities throughout Massachusetts needs to allow more homes to be built for the families that live there, for the kids that were raised there, and for future residents as well.
Okay, so the state government was trying to do that with this law, and it's just hit a roadblock in Milton. Tell us what happened.
Yeah, so in 2021, the legislature signed, and then the legislature passed, and then Governor Baker signed this MBTA Communities Act that requires 177 cities and towns in the MBTA region to adopt multifamily zoning, where at least 15 homes per acre is allowed by right. And there's some complex guidelines that the state put out to implement this program. One of the communities that had a deadline last year by December 31st was the town of Milton. They and about 11 other communities that are classified as rapid transit communities did adopt zoning that was in compliance with this law. Again, allowing homes of at least 15 units per acre to be built near transit. What happened was that even though the plan in Milton was passed overwhelmingly through town meeting last fall, some of the residents of town who were opposed to this plan actually brought a referendum forward, collected enough signatures to force a town-wide vote. And that's what happened last week. In that vote, the residents who showed up to vote by a bit of a majority decided to do away with the law. And now Milton is not in compliance with this state law.
So what's going to happen to Milton because it's not in compliance?
There's a few consequences that they face under the law. There's a few state grant programs that they become ineligible for, including MassWorks, which is one of the largest state infrastructure grants to municipalities. The Healy administration also added about a dozen other programs, housing programs, open space, a variety of other municipal grants that Milton now will become ineligible for. In addition to that, Attorney General Campbell has said that she believes it is her duty as the highest ranking state attorney in Massachusetts to uphold the laws of the Commonwealth. And she has said that she is taking a look at bringing legal action against any community that doesn't comply, and specifically looking now at Milton as the one rapid transit community that's currently not in compliance with the law.
So, Jesse, do you think this is going to spread? Are other communities going to vote similarly, or will the state's response maybe stifle that and nip that in the bud?
Yeah, I'm hopeful that the state's response will nip that in the bud, as you say. I will say we have gotten calls from some of our members and affiliate groups around the region who are concerned about something like this happening in their community. And putting it up to popular vote like this, even if town meeting passes it. But what I really would say is that, in addition to the dozen or so rapid transit communities that did vote to adopt zoning in compliance with this law last year, we now have about 23 or more communities across the region, some of which don't even have a deadline under the state's guidelines to comply until the end of this year. 23 or more communities that are in some phase of complying, either having adopted new zoning or submitted some existing multifamily zoning to the state's Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities to be determined as in compliance with this law. So I think that's a really great trend. Despite what happened in Milton last week, I am hopeful that the vast majority of communities will uphold their responsibility under this state law.
So how much new housing should we expect from these new communities, and when will it hit the market?
It's a really great question. The reality is this is a zoning mandate for communities. Zoning just says what can be built where. It doesn't actually require any homes to be built. There are many factors that go into determining when property owners or developers propose to build something in compliance with existing zoning. So it probably is going to be a period of 10 years or more before we reach the sort of full build out capacity under this law. And, I think the reality is that we're not actually ever going to see every new home that will be zoned for in the 177 communities that have to comply with this law. We will not see all of those units ever get built because there are so many factors, market conditions, costs of materials, a variety of things. So what does get built, I think, will take a long period of time. So it's not going to be an overnight solution.
So, Jesse, a few days ago, I was taking my dog for a walk in Boston Common in the morning, and a man came up to me. I'm not going to use his name to preserve his privacy. And he started playing with my dog, and he had real difficulty communicating. But he finally managed to explain that he had Social Security benefits, and that's what he was living off of. But he didn't. He was homeless. That was the word he used. And he was getting a bequest. And basically, what it turned out was he heard me talking about investing with another dog dad, and he wanted to ask our advice on what to do about the money that he was going to inherit from his father. And Jesse, I kind of left this conversation in tears because I didn't have the ability to help him more than that, and help him train to be a caseworker. But I left it enraged because this man was homeless not because he didn't have income. He did, and not because there wasn't a government agency that was trying to help him. There was, but because we have chosen not to build enough homes in Boston for people not just like him, but people. So help us just in the last couple seconds, who is suffering because we don't have enough housing here?
Yeah, I mean, I think who suffers is sort of the least resourced people in our society. When you have hundreds of thousands of homes short of where you need to be to house everyone in your city or your region or your state, it's those people who can't bid up the cost of housing, right? So the gentleman you were talking about, may have at times before just on the open market tried to find an apartment, but found that it was going to a higher income individual who could offer the landlord a lot more money. So this all, filters down. It's the people who are at the lowest rungs of society, who have the fewest resources, who are hurt the most. And, you talk about an example in Boston. Boston has built a lot of homes in recent years. I think Boston does need to build more homes. This law, the MBTA Communities Act, doesn't even apply to the city of Boston. It applies to 177 cities and towns outside of Boston, most of whom have built barely anything for an individual like you were talking about, or others like him. Many of these communities have not built anything besides large luxury single-family homes. And to build more apartment buildings, more affordable housing is the path forward to address our housing crisis and serve everyone in our Commonwealth.
Jesse Canson-Bananov, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Now let's take a step back and hear from a couple of experts on just how the cost of housing has gotten so out of control in Massachusetts and where the MBTA Communities Act falls into the larger effort to address the state's affordability crisis. I'm joined now by Lisa T. Alexander, a housing law and policy professor at Boston College, and Jeff Levine, a lecturer of economic development and planning at MIT. He is also the former director of planning and community development for Brookline. Lisa, how is this law trying to address the housing problems here in Massachusetts?
Well, the law is a state law that says that really we're having a statewide housing crisis, not just an affordable housing crisis, but a housing production crisis in the state. And that therefore the state is mandating that all of the 177 municipalities in the state, besides Boston, come up with some plan for helping to produce more housing, and that each municipality really has to bear its fair share of the responsibility for helping to create more housing.
And what does a fair share look like? How is that allocated across communities?
Well, I think it's going to be different for each municipality, as the law specifies. Some municipalities that are close to transit and have different requirements than others. But the idea is that the experts are going to assess what the fair share should be, but that each municipality has to be willing to bear their fair share, and that we can't exempt municipalities out of that responsibility. It's the tendency of municipalities to resist creating even a plan for zoning for housing that has really led to the elevation of costs for housing for everyone throughout the state. And I think the law seeks to remedy that by requiring municipalities to come up with a plan.
Jeff, why have municipalities been so successful at sort of holding off on housing construction for so long? Why do they want to? And is this enough to reverse that trend?
Sure. Well, I think a lot of the current trend at downzoning and keeping housing out of communities really started in the 70s and 80s when growth management became a big issue. There was concern about the type of housing that was happening and just feeling like things were out of control. There was a lot of downzoning at the time, and I think it became politically very popular. I think politicians very rarely lost an election on downzoning a neighborhood or making it sort of less likely that more housing would be produced in a community for a long time. That is shifting a little bit now, but for a long time it was a winning political move. So even if local officials and town planning staff supported allowing for more housing, at the end of the day, they report to the political leaders, and political leaders often found it was politically most popular to downzone.
So given that political dynamic, has something shifted with this state law?
I think it's given, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I think it's given a lot of impetus to come up with a proactive plan and give maybe a little political cover for actually sort of pulling back on some of that downzoning over the last 30 years, which honestly, I think a lot of local officials may secretly support.
I also want to say, I think that the downzoning, or the tendency to zone for single family homes on large lots with large parking, 2-car garages, even predated the 70s. It's been a long-standing way to create sort of exclusionary communities. But I think what people are realizing now is that creating those exclusionary communities has reduced the supply of housing for everyone within the state, and therefore it's elevating the price of housing for everyone in the state. And now people are realizing we need more middle housing for not the lowest income necessarily, or even the highest income, but people in the middle. And the failure to zone for different creative possibilities, multifamily housing, housing near transit stops, triple deckers, et cetera, has prevented us from creating the kind of housing we desperately need. And I think more people are feeling that acute crisis now in the state than in recent years.
Jeff, you used to handle this kind of problem for Brookline. How do you anticipate municipalities responding to these new pressures?
Well, I think most communities have done what they should do, which is to come up with a proactive plan within a set deadline to figure out how to meet the law and also meet local priorities. So I think on the whole, it's been I've been pleasantly surprised with the approach most communities have taken to the law. There are always exceptions, but in general, I think, as I said before, sometimes having a state mandate gives you a little bit of push to do some planning that politically may be hard to do otherwise. And I would second your comment earlier about how a lot of times zoning has been used as an exclusionary tool to keep people out, and I think that's just wrong. And I'm glad to see the state is taking some action on that.
Lisa, if part of this is the exclusionary rules that have been going on, is the state push on that likely to relax those pressures as well, or are we going to see, communities trying to work their way around the law?
Well, I think that traditionally zoning has been a local power that local municipalities get to have a lot of decision making about, and it's rare that states take over that power or bring that power back under their control. They usually defer to localities. But in this case, the tendency to defer to localities has really caused a housing crisis. And I think that many municipalities are still going to want to have their local control. They were still going to hear arguments like, this is going to be hard for us. This is going to strain our resources. We have a certain kind of village life that we want to retain. And I'm not saying that those values are necessarily bad, but the reality is that more housing, more different types of housing has to be produced both to house people for sustainability reasons and for other reasons. And the state has said, look, since we can't rely on municipalities to do that on their own, we are mandating that municipalities come up with some kind of plan. And as was said, there's flexibility in the plan. They're not telling you exactly what you have to do, but they're saying there's minimum guidelines that you have to meet.
Lisa, if a town does not meet these requirements, what sort of penalties do you expect them to face, and what should they?
Well, the MBTA Communities Law specifies the types of state funding that the state could withhold from a municipality that does not comply. They said the Housing Choice Initiative funds, MassWorks infrastructure program, local capital projects, and those are funds that it could withhold. But it's also clear in the law that there could be certain kinds of civil actions that the Attorney General could bring, and the Attorney General has been quite specific that to the extent that a municipality's resistance to this state mandate ends up violating fair housing laws, state fair housing laws or federal fair housing laws, that they're prepared to enforce those laws too. So there could be other penalties besides what's specified in the law.
Jeff, are those kinds of pressures enough will they work, or is something else needed?
I mean, I think they do generally work. I think there's always going to be communities that push and feel very willing to push the envelope, but at the end of the day, even home rules are creation of the state. So, if I was a community that decided I was going to ignore something like 3A and the MBTA Communities Act, I'd be feeling a little nervous because, again, we always assume that power comes from the cities and towns to the state, and it's actually really the opposite. So we'll see how it plays out. I think most communities are doing this in good faith.
So, the state is the one that delegates this power, and the state delegates the powers to municipalities. So when the state kind of occupies the field and says, here's what needs to be done, municipalities do have to heed that. And right now, the state has incentives to come down hard on cities that resist and don't try to comply, which is partially why mostly every other municipality has come up with some plan.
So, Jeff, do you see anything happening in Boston as well, since Boston is the one sort of part of the state that's exempt from this law?
Well, I think Boston has a slightly different dynamic in that traditionally in more of the urban cores in all over the country, there's more support for housing as a political issue. So I think the political dynamic's a little different in Boston and to some extent in Cambridge and Somerville and some of the gateway cities, where there's more political support for upzoning and for producing more housing than in the more suburban communities.
I was also going to add on, and with respect to the fair share question, Boston has disproportionately borne its fair share of the creation of affordable housing compared to these other municipalities. So Boston is undergoing its own rezoning plan, which it has to undertake, but it has already put up quite a bit of the responsibility for creating housing and affordable housing, whereas many of these other municipalities have not done as much.
Lisa, Jeff, thanks so much for joining us today.
Okay, thanks for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Finally tonight, frustrations are rising for MBTA riders as shutdowns, power outages, and inaccurate schedules continue to bog down commutes. GBH News transportation reporter Bob C. joins me now with the latest and with some answers to some of your questions. Bob, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Bob, what happened on Thursday?
Well, Thursday was a particularly significant day because so many different things converged, unfortunate things. First of all, that was the day the MBTA was supposed to announce that it successfully completed a closure from Alewife to Harvard, eliminating lots of speed restrictions. But they never got to do that because they were kind of upstaged by a massive power outage that took place right during the morning rush hour. It didn't affect power to the trains, but it affected power to all the signal systems, all the lighting in terminals, the escalators, the elevators, everything just came to a stop. And it turned out to be a 30-year-old power cable that had failed. I checked today, and there's still no explanation of exactly what happened. But back in November, the MBTA had released an inventory of its assets and said that 76% of its power system needed upgrades. So the problem with the power system, and by the way, a lot of these closures on the Red Line and Green Line, they deal not only with track repairs, but repairing the power systems and the signals as well. So unfortunately, everything came to a halt. The trains had to be operated manually for a while, and eventually it took over 2 hours before things were brought back to, quote, normal. So that was a particularly frustrating time for commuters, especially since it was freezing as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, right now, normal's not that great. The T has been announcing that they're doing, ending shutdown zones on the Green Line. I live downtown. I take the Green Line all the time. I got to say, if they've ended the slowdowns, I don't want to see what slowdowns look like. What's going on here?
Well, they haven't ended the slowdowns yet, but they did tackle probably the most congested part of the Green Line. That's where all the branches come together at Kenmore and then go through these tunnels that really needed a lot of work to downtown. And what makes the Green Line different is it's got many more stops, so that you don't get the time to really accelerate and go as fast as possible, 25 miles an hour at the most, whereas on the red and orange and blue lines, you can get up to 40 miles an hour. So once the speed restrictions are lifted on those lines, you tend to notice it more than on the Green Line. The Green Line has a lot more stopping and starting, and it does have this kind of congestion problem when you get to that tunnel area. So that's one of the reasons you're not seeing it. But the current Green Line shutdown, which is everything west of Copley, is pretty substantial. And people should see some results after that, which is, I think, going to be wrapped up March 8th.
So that seems like progress. But just sort of stepping back for a second, I used to work in Tokyo, where they explained to me once that if your train was more than 1 minute late, you would be given a certificate so you could explain to your boss why you were late for work by that 1 minute. So it is possible to run an urban train system on schedule. I've seen it done. We seem to be failing pretty spectacularly at that. Given all the mechanical issues, things like that, why can't they even get the schedules right?
Well, the schedules of the subway trains, that's a really good question. I think one of the things that has hampered them is a lack of personnel, particularly in something called the Operations Control Center. And the FTA, the Federal Transit Administration, moved in and said you cannot have people working 16-hour shifts. You've got to change that. So not having enough dispatchers, they had to cut back on the service. So that did not help at all. And I think that's one of the main problems. They're getting that solved slowly, but there still are problems with minor delays and problems in the red and orange line that can cascade and cause other problems. So.
Yeah, I mean, so when I convinced my wife to move to Boston, I told her how amazing the T was. This is not making me look great, but I mean...
Well, amazing can be taken different ways.
So what are the prospects of real meaningful improvement in the next year, say, or...
I think it's going to take at least a year before you start to see some improvements in terms of the timing and the efficiency of the trains. But it's because the system was neglected for so many decades, really, that fixing it is that much harder and more expensive and takes a lot longer.
And I know there have been some discussions about congestion pricing. What would that look like, and is there any prospect of it actually happening?
Well, congestion pricing is the concept is that people will pay to drive on a particular street at a certain time. Academics will tell you that the only way to solve traffic congestion is making people pay for it. It's a very controversial proposal, but it's very different when you apply it to like the city of Boston, which was a proposal that was introduced this past week, which would electronically kind of ding you every time you passed a certain barrier on a certain street at a certain time. This is a long way from being reality. This is an introduction of a concept that I'm sure will be debated for a long time. But I think the debate will be good so that people learn more about some of the ways that other cities are trying to control congestion, like New York City, for example.
And so, Bob, we have questions from some of our viewers about what's going on. Sam from Cambridge had a question about fare boxes.
My name is Sam. I'm from Cambridge, and my question for Bob is, when are the new fare boxes going to come online?
Well, they were supposed to be rolled out in 2020. So where are we, 2024? They will be eventually, but nobody wants to really set a timeline for that. One of the ironic things that happened on Thursday was the MBTA was shooting a promotional video at North Station showing people how to use the new fare gates when they were informed that Phil Eng had, declared the T free that day, and I think they got the video done about 10 minutes before the fare gates were open completely. But this is going to take a lot of education of customers to learn how to use it. It's going to be kind of a situation where you tap your card or your phone, and that's the way it's going to happen. But it's still unclear to a lot of people how it's actually going to work. But it's going to take some time to roll out, I would think.
So sounds like we're all going to be stuck in tunnels sounds like at least another year while we wait for this to straighten out.
Well, all of these things take a great deal of time. There's no question about that. So patience is, something T-riders have become used to having, but they're going to need more of it.
Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
That's it for tonight, but come back tomorrow for the battle of GBH's former Jeopardy contestants. I'll go head-to-head with Edgar B. Herwick III. Think we still have what it takes? Tune in tomorrow at 7 to find out. Thanks for watching, and good night.
Yo.